which I'll tell you about. So then Prabhupada was going to San Francisco for the first time, and I was carrying the mridanga. So at the airport, in those days we didn't have the Balaram mridangas, the kind of plastic metal ones. We only had the clay ones. So I was carrying the mridanga, and outside the airport everybody was gathering around Prabhupada. And there was this high table, but I didn't realize with my imperfect senses that the table was actually slanted. So I put the mridanga on the slanted high table, and naturally it rolled off and broke on the floor. Again I wanted to die. It's not so easy to die, Gurudev said. Even if you think you want to. So we all followed Prabhupada into the lobby, and we were sitting on the floor, and Prabhupada was sitting on the chair in the lobby, just like Gurudev does. And I just couldn't get the mridanga off my mind. So then Prabhupada looked at me and said, "Don't feel bad. We will get hundreds of mridangas, but don't break them." So those were the easy ones. Those were the not so bad ones. Now we're going to come to the harder ones. Like suppose Kanayal and Sachi are cooking lunch, and they accidentally put sugar instead of salt, and they make an offering, and everybody, or salt instead of sugar, like somebody once did in the Charinamrita, and Prabhupada got angry. So, but if they make a mistake like that and the devotees go, yuck, it's forgotten by the next meal. But when something goes in a book, it's too late. So I'm going to share some of those things with you. The first one was just saved from going into his magazine. That is, when Prabhupada was in San Francisco, the devotee who was in charge of the Back to Godhead magazine publication asked me to do a stencil drawing of Krishna stealing the clothes of the unmarried gopis who were performing austerities in order to get Krishna as their husband or beloved. So they were bathing in the Jamuna. This was the last day of their 1 month long austerities. And they had Katyayani Devi that they made, this Murti, on the land, and they went to take bath in the Jamuna without clothes. And they just went to the girls section, so there was no boys around. Except Krishna, in order to fulfill their vrat, their vow and their austerities and their desire, he wanted to show them that I'm accepting you as your husband. Because only the husband can see the wife naked. No one else obviously is allowed to. So Krishna went up on a tree where they had hung all of their garments, and he said to them, if you want your garments back, then you have to come on shore one by one and with folded palms beg your garments. So that was the picture. This was a Kangra print. Kangra is a company that does art, and they follow the theme of the Gita Press publications, the biggest Hindi publishers in India. And the only problem with the Gita Press publications is that they're Mayavad. So in this big coffee table size Kangra book of paintings, it had the Gita Press Mayavad interpretation of the pictures. So when I first read the description of the picture, it said, this symbolic picture shows that everyone must stand naked before the Lord. So I thought, oh, that's great. That must mean that nobody should have material desires when they approach the Lord. So I did the drawing, but in those days, the press in the 26 2nd Avenue Temple was a mimeograph machine, which was, I'd say, it was about the size of the altar here. Let me show you. It was about the size of the altar, but half the height. And the way that you print is that you go like this. You wind it, because it was a mimeograph machine. And that is what made Srila Prabhupada's Back to Godhead magazines at first. And the devotees, after lunch, would make piles of the different pages and collate them. You know, page 1, 2, 3. And then somebody would staple it, right. So I couldn't exactly draw it with a pencil or anything. I had to take this blue piece of paper and with an inkless pen, I had to make impressions in that. And then that was printed in the mimeograph machine. So then the description and the picture, I was pretty proud of the copy that I made. They were both stapled, I mean all the pages were stapled together and sent as an advanced copy. The first one was sent as an advanced copy to Srila Prabhupada in San Francisco. We were in New York. Then some devotees were going up to help with the brand new Montreal temple, Montreal, Canada. So I went with them because I didn't want to live with my parents anymore. So they had room for me in the Montreal temple. So now here we are in Montreal, and all the pages of the Back to Godhead magazine was sent there. And we were all stapling and collating the pages. So as we were doing that, the president of the temple, Janardhan, said, "Excuse me, Prabhus, I don't mean to interrupt, but I just received a call from Rai Rama, the head of the Back to Godhead, who's with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada saw the magazine, the advanced copy, and he said to rip out or to take out, thinking that you haven't collated, take out the picture and the description from the magazine. Everything in the magazine is fine, except for that picture and that description." And then again I wanted to die, but then a couple of days later, Srila Prabhupada wrote a letter explaining further what he meant. And he explained about the Gita Press publication, how they're all Mayavadi, and how this description was Mayavadi. And their idea is that God is ultimately formless, and he is just temporarily covered by a form made of the mode of goodness to accept devotional service. But then ultimately everybody merges with that impersonal God. So Prabhupada wrote that this would destroy what I'm trying to do. What you did would destroy if it was, actually stapled and distributed. It would destroy the mission that I'm establishing. That the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the ultimate goal of life, to serve Him, with us having a form as His devotee. He said, so I don't want you to keep any copies of the English translation of the Gita Press, Srimad Bhagavatam. You can keep a copy only to show an example if you're writing a comparative study of the right philosophy and the wrong philosophy. He said Gita Press has created havoc in the spiritual development of the world. Whoever speaks Hindi or English who gets their translation. So then it gets worse as it goes along. Then a few years later, we were painting for Prabhupada's. It's not that everything was wrong, I'm just picking out the wrong things. So we were painting for Prabhupada's third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, where it discusses in very brief the Rasa Leela. And there was a description, and the point of all these pastimes is to ask the spiritual master first before doing anything. Because even if we think we're understanding, we're all fallen conditioned souls with so many births of sins, and in this birth, mediating, intoxication, gambling, illicit sex, what could our brains fathom? So we were doing the Rasa Leela painting, and there was already a Rasa Leela painting in the Krishna book, the original Krishna book of Prabhupada, by Devahuti, who, from my point of view at the time, we were just in our early 20s, or 20. She was about 50, and I wasn't particularly crazy about her paintings, because she mostly either copied the Indian stylistic prints, or her painting was just stylistic. It wasn't very realistic. And I thought ours were realistic, mine was realistic. So she did a copy of an Indian print of the Rasa Leela. And then I wanted to make a much better one. So I had read in Prabhupada's Nectar of Devotion that Krishna looked like his hair was long, and it looked like he was being embraced by the goddess of fortune, because his hair was so long. And then it also described in Prabhupada's manuscript how the gopis' dresses during the Rasa Leela, their dresses were falling and opening, their belts were opening, and their hair was flying and loosening. So I made this big endeavor to make this great painting for Srila Prabhupada by taking a team of devotees from the New York Temple. This was around 72 or so. To the park, Central Park or whatever park in New York, and having them all pose in different poses for Krishna and the gopis. And we took out the BBT professional photographer, Murali Vadana, to help us. We all went out in a van. It was a whole big endeavor, and then all came back. And then he developed the pictures, and then I painted the picture. It was printed in his third canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. And when Prabhupada saw that, he said, it looks like a hippie plaything. And everybody in the painting looked like hippies, with, wild flying hair, loose clothes. And it should be ripped out of every book, but unfortunately that time it was already printed. It wasn't like with the Back to Godhead magazine where we could take it out before. And in those days, it wasn't like the rinky-dink mom and pop shop GVP that we have now, where we think it's a big deal if we print 5,000 copies. In those days, it was 50,000 copies, 100,000 copies.